She was sleeping with another man even when she called me beloved. She knew that her son was not mine. But she allowed me to raise him for 14 years. When she told me the truth, she wanted to rob me of every cent. I thought I had the perfect life, or at least as close to perfect as someone like me could hope for. I had a steady job that paid the bills and gave me a sense of purpose, a house we had worked hard to turn into a home, and a teenage son named Josh who could make me laugh even on the worst days. My wife, Rachel, and I had been together for 12 years, and though we had the occasional argument like anyone else, I genuinely believed we were solid. I loved her. I trusted her. I believed in the quiet strength of what we had built together. I never once doubted that Josh was my own son. From the moment I held him in the delivery room, wrapped in that thin hospital blanket, red-faced and wailing, I had felt something shift in me, like everything before that moment had just been a rehearsal. He had my dark hair, Rachel's nose, and a stubborn streak that made me smile even when it drove me crazy. I took him to his first soccer practice, taught him how to ride a bike, sat with him through endless science projects and scraped knees and late-night fevers. I was there for every birthday, every school play, every time he came home from school bursting with excitement or dragging his backpack like it weighed 100 pounds. He was mine. In every way that mattered, he was mine. Or at least that's what I believed. But 3 months ago, my entire life collapsed in the space of a single evening, as if everything I had built, everything I had trusted, had been quietly rigged to explode. It started with a strange kind of silence at dinner, the kind you can't quite name but feel in your chest. Rachel wasn't eating, barely looking up, her hands restless in her lap. I asked if she was okay and she looked at me with this expression I still can't forget. Part guilt, part fear, and something else I couldn't name yet. And then, with a voice that barely sounded like hers, she said she had to tell me something. What followed didn't come in a dramatic confession or a burst of tears. It came in pieces, careful and cold. She said she had been having an affair. That it wasn't recent, that it had been going on for several months. And then she said the name, Eric. Her high school boyfriend. The one she used to talk about with a faint smile, always claiming it was just part of the past. They had reconnected, she said, started meeting up, talking, texting. One thing led to another, and the betrayal unfolded behind my back while I was driving Josh to practice or staying late at work to make sure we could afford a family vacation that apparently meant nothing anymore. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when she said that she had taken a paternity test, without telling me, without asking, without even giving me a chance to prepare. She said she had always wondered, that something about the timing never sat right with her, that Eric had once hinted at it and she just couldn't ignore the possibility any longer. So she did it, quietly, secretly. And according to her, the results showed that Josh is not my biological son. Just like that, in one breath, she shattered everything I believed about my life, my marriage, and the boy I had spent nearly 14 years raising as my own. I was shocked, completely and utterly blindsided in a way that made my thoughts stutter and my body feel like it didn't belong to me. How was this even possible? We were together when she got pregnant. I remember everything about that time, how we had just moved into our first real place, how we talked about names even before we saw the second pink line, how she cried when the test turned positive and I held her, promising that we were in this together. I was there from the very beginning, rubbing her back through morning sickness, going to every ultrasound appointment, feeling Josh kick under my hand for the first time like he was already reaching out to me. I cut his umbilical cord. I held him while he screamed his way into the world. I paced the halls with him during those impossible nights when sleep was a luxury and love was something you proved minute by minute, hour by hour. I taught him how to throw a football, how to tie his shoes, how to hold the flashlight steady when we fixed things around the house. I sat in parent-teacher conferences and wiped tears off his cheeks when a friend let him down. I was the one who taught him how to drive, who showed up to his science fairs, who cheered the loudest at his soccer games even when they lost. I raised this boy. I know the rhythm of his laugh and the exact shade of worry in his eyes when something's wrong. I am his father. For real. Not because of DNA, not because of some stupid test done behind my back, but because I showed up, every damn day, for nearly 14 years. And now I'm supposed to just believe that none of that matters? That biology outweighs everything I've poured into him? No, I couldn't accept that. I still can't. But then Rachel, with the same detachment she had used to deliver every other blow that night, said something that broke whatever was left of me. She told me she had known from the beginning. Not suspected, known. She looked me in the eye and said she had always believed Eric was Josh's biological father, but she decided to keep me in the dark anyway. Her reasoning? Because I was the better option. Those were her exact words, like she had made some calculated business decision rather than one that reshaped the course of 2 lives. She said I was more promising, more stable, that I had a future ahead of me, and Eric back then was a nobody. He didn't have a job, didn't have direction, didn't have anything she could rely on. So she chose me. Not out of love, not out of faith, but out of convenience. Because I was responsible, because I showed up, because I offered a kind of life she could step into and count on. And while I was building that life, while I was putting in every effort to be a good husband and father, she was silently carrying the weight of that secret and letting me believe it was all real. She watched me fall in love with Josh, watched me sacrifice, celebrate, worry, parent, all while knowing that she had made a decision that I was never allowed to be part of. I wasn't given a choice. I wasn't given the truth. I was just handed a role and expected to play it without question, all because I looked like the safer bet. And now, sitting in the wreckage of what I thought was my life, all I can hear are those words repeating in my head, better option. Like my love, my effort, my years meant nothing more than a calculated gamble she never intended to admit to. Now, as if everything she had already done wasn't enough, Rachel said she wanted a new beginning with Eric. Those were the words she used, like we were all characters in some glossy story she could rewrite with a clean slate. She told me they had decided to move to another city, where Eric was opening a branch of his business, and that this was the perfect opportunity for a fresh start, for them and for Josh. She said it with this unsettling calm, like the destruction she'd caused in our lives was just collateral damage, something regrettable but necessary for her version of happiness. And then she said something that made the room spin. She demanded full custody of Josh. She looked at me and said without flinching that Josh should be with his biological family now. As if I had just been a placeholder, someone to keep the seat warm until the real father was ready to step in. She acted like the last 14 years of my life had been some kind of borrowed time, like the bond between me and my son could be erased by a single word, biology. She spoke of uprooting him, pulling him out of his school, his home, his life, and transplanting him into this new world with Eric as if it were the natural next step. She never even asked how Josh felt about it. She didn't care that I had been there every day of his life, that I had built every part of who he is alongside him. To her, none of it mattered anymore. All that counted now was blood, and the fact that Eric, who had been absent for more than a decade, suddenly wanted to step in now that things were stable, now that Rachel had made her choice. And somehow I was supposed to step aside and let it happen. Like my fatherhood had an expiration date I was just too blind to see. But Josh stayed to live with me. In the end, despite everything Rachel said, despite her plans and her demands and the way she tried to redefine our family with a single conversation, he didn't go with her. Because she never even asked me before she told him everything. She didn't prepare him, didn't give him space, didn't protect him from the weight of the truth she had kept locked away for his entire life. One day she just sat him down and told him that Eric was his real father. No warning, no context, just the cold, blunt truth dropped into the middle of his world like a grenade. He came home with his face blotchy, his eyes red, and when I opened the door he didn't say anything. He just walked past me and into the kitchen, where he slumped into a chair like his body couldn't hold the shock. I followed, not knowing what I would say, not even knowing if he would want me near him. But when I sat across from him, he looked up at me with tears welling again and whispered, "Is it true?" And when I nodded, because I had promised never to lie to him, he broke. He started crying, shaking, this raw kind of heartbreak that I had never seen in him before, and suddenly I was crying too. I walked around the table and pulled him into my arms, and we just sat there in the kitchen, wrapped around each other, broken and breathless, like the air had been sucked out of the world. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to make it better. We just held on to each other, both of us trying to stay upright in a moment that made no sense. That night he told me he didn't want to go. That no matter what the test said, I was his dad. That I had always been his dad. And that he wanted to stay with me. And in that moment, with all the pain and confusion still swirling around us, I knew we had lost something we could never get back. But we still had each other. And that had to be enough. I filed for divorce immediately. There was no hesitation left in me, no more room for compromise or second chances. After everything she had done, lying for over a decade, betraying me, blindsiding our son with the truth, and then trying to rip him away, there was nothing left worth saving. 4 years she had stayed at home while I worked long hours, took on overtime, made sure the bills were paid and that our son never went without. I was the one providing for her, for all of us, while she sat in the comfort of a life I had built with both hands and pretended everything was fine. Now, after all that, she had the audacity to demand alimony, a large financial settlement, and full custody of Josh. She stood there, across from me in mediation, acting like she had been the victim, like she was entitled to carve up the life we had and take the biggest pieces for herself. She kept referring to Josh as her son, conveniently forgetting that I had been the one raising him every single day, that every memory he had as a child was built with me in it. And I wasn't going to back down. I told my lawyer and I told the court, Josh is my son. Biology doesn't erase 14 years of love, of effort, of being the one who showed up when it mattered. I didn't care what she threatened, how many lies she tried to spin, or how loudly she insisted that Eric should now be part of the picture. I was his father in every way that counted, and I was going to fight for him with everything I had left. Because love doesn't walk away. Love doesn't abandon you for a new beginning. Love stays. And I wasn't going anywhere. We started a lawsuit, and in the beginning I felt certain I could win. I had the history, the memories, the evidence of every bedtime story, every parent-teacher conference, every scraped knee I had kissed, and every night I stayed up with Josh when he had a fever. I truly believed the truth would be enough. But then Rachel and Eric started twisting everything, painting a version of me that I didn't even recognize. Suddenly, I wasn't the father who had been there through everything. I was the man who was allegedly absent, emotionally cold, disinterested, detached. They started slandering me, pushing this narrative that I hadn't been involved in Josh's life, that I barely showed up to school events, that I was distant and hard to talk to. Eric, who hadn't even been around for most of Josh's life, suddenly positioned himself as the concerned, present biological father. And Rachel backed him, repeating lie after lie, insisting that I had never really connected with Josh, that I didn't ask enough questions, that I had been too focused on work to notice what was happening at home. It was like watching my entire identity as a father get peeled away, layer by layer, in a courtroom built to weigh facts against fiction, but unable to truly measure what it means to love a child with your whole heart. I sat there, forced to defend my place in my own son's life, while the people who had broken it were allowed to question whether I had ever really been there at all. And even though I knew none of it was true, the damage those lies caused, inside the courtroom and in my heart, was real. Josh came to me one evening, his face pale and serious in a way I had never seen before, and told me he needed to talk. I could tell from the way he was gripping the sleeves of his hoodie that whatever he was about to say had been sitting heavy on him for days, maybe longer. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same spot where we had clung to each other just weeks earlier, and after a moment of silence he said that he had overheard something about the case. He told me he had been at Rachel's house for a visit, and while he was walking down the hallway to grab his phone charger, he heard her and Eric talking behind a closed door. He paused, thinking nothing of it at first, but then their voices grew louder, sharper. That's when he heard them talking about the court case, about how they could make sure I didn't stand a chance. Josh looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes and said, "They were talking about lying. About making you look like someone who hurt me." I just stared at him, unable to speak, as he went on to say they were planning to claim that I was abusive, that I had hit him, that I had a temper. He said he was scared, really scared, but he didn't want to be silent. He knew it was wrong. He knew it wasn't true. And even though it would be hard to stand up against his own mother and the man she was now calling his real dad, he had decided he couldn't let them get away with it. His voice trembled when he said, "You never hurt me, Dad. You never even yelled. You don't deserve this." I reached across the table and held his hand, and in that moment I felt both proud and heartbroken. Proud that he had the courage to speak up, and heartbroken that he was ever put in a position where he had to. No child should have to choose between telling the truth and staying loyal to a parent, but he did. And he chose integrity. He chose me. After that, everything spiraled faster than I ever expected. On the day of the next court appearance, as we stepped out of the courthouse into the heavy afternoon air, Rachel completely unraveled. She saw Josh walking beside me, calm but determined, and something in her seemed to snap. She stormed toward him without a word, grabbed his arm tightly and started shaking him, her voice rising with panic and rage as she accused him of betrayal, of turning on his own mother, of choosing the wrong side. Josh froze, caught between fear and disbelief, and I reacted without thinking. I stepped between them, putting myself in front of him, and pushed her back, not violently, just enough to create space to protect him. I told her to stop, to get her hands off him, my voice low but firm. She stumbled a little, then glared at me like I was the one who had gone too far, but I didn't back down. Josh was shaking, and I could feel his fingers gripping the back of my jacket. What she didn't realize was that my lawyer, who had walked out just behind us, had already pulled out his phone. He had caught the whole thing on video, her shouting, her grabbing Josh the moment I intervened. It wasn't just our word against hers anymore. There was proof now, raw and undeniable. She had shown exactly who she was, not just to me but to the court, to her son, and to anyone who needed to see the truth. And the truth was, the woman who once called herself the better parent had let her desperation turn into something dangerous. We went home after that day at the courthouse, both of us exhausted and emotionally drained, trying to find some sense of normal again in a life that had been twisted inside out. Josh stayed close to me that week, quieter than usual but calmer too, like the weight of carrying the truth was finally starting to lift. We didn't talk much about what happened with Rachel, not right away. We just existed in the same space, cooking dinner, watching TV, sharing silence that felt more like healing than avoidance. Then a few days later I opened the front door and saw an unmarked envelope lying on the doorstep. There was no postage, no name, just thick paper sealed in a way that immediately made my stomach clench. I brought it inside, sat down at the kitchen table and slowly opened it, not knowing what I was about to find. Inside was a new paternity test, professionally done, official, with no hand-scribbled edits or questionable sources. And right there, in clear, undeniable wording, was the result. I was Josh's biological father. Not just in heart, not just in spirit, but by blood. I stared at it for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands, trying to make sense of everything. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, it had all been built on a false foundation. Rachel's original claim, the test she had used to justify tearing our lives apart, had either been wrong or forged. And for what? Control? Revenge? Fear? I called Josh into the room, showed him the paper, and for the first time in weeks, I saw his face completely light up with relief. We didn't cheer. We didn't cry. We just sat there, stunned, overwhelmed, two people slowly putting their lives back together, this time with the truth finally on our side. It turned out that Rachel had bribed a lab worker to falsify the original paternity test results, and I only learned the full truth because the man came to me himself. One evening, a nervous knock echoed at the door, and when I opened it, I saw a young man standing there with his head down and his hands shaking. He introduced himself by name and told me he worked at the clinic where Rachel had supposedly done the test. At first, I couldn't even speak. I didn't know whether to shut the door or let him talk, but then he looked me in the eye and said he was sorry. He said he couldn't live with it anymore. He told me Rachel had approached him months ago, told him a story about a complicated family situation, said she needed the results changed for everyone's good. But it wasn't just manipulation, she offered him something tangible. A share in a business she claimed she and Eric were building, some small investment opportunity he could benefit from if he did her this one favor. And he fell for it. He believed her. He changed the result of the test, altering the report to say that I wasn't Josh's biological father, when in fact I was. He said it hadn't sat right with him since, that he had lost sleep, watched the fallout from a distance, and realized just how deeply he'd helped destroy something that wasn't his to touch. He handed me a written statement and apologized again, this time nearly in tears. And I just stood there, stunned, trying to absorb the weight of what I was hearing. The woman I had loved for over a decade had deliberately ripped my life apart using a lie so precise, so cruel that it almost worked, until the truth came knocking on my front door. I took those results straight to my lawyer and we brought them to court, attaching the lab worker's statement like the final piece of a puzzle I had been fighting to complete for months. Before the next hearing, I requested a private meeting with Rachel. No courtroom, no audience, just her, me, and my lawyer in a small conference room where the truth could finally take up all the space it deserved. I placed the real paternity results on the table in front of her, alongside the signed confession from the lab worker, and watched her face slowly unravel. I told her, calmly but without flinching, that she had two choices. Either she signed a complete relinquishment of parental rights, walked away and left Josh out of her toxic game once and for all, or I would file a case for fraud, conspiracy, and every shred of damage she had tried to inflict on me and our son. I let her sit with that for a long moment. She didn't speak. She just stared at the papers like they were burning a hole through the table. Her hands were trembling. Her lips parted once, then closed again. Then she broke. She started crying, not the kind of crying that comes from sorrow, but the kind that spills out when someone knows they've lost and there's nowhere left to hide. She sobbed into her hands, begged for forgiveness, said she wasn't thinking straight, that it had gotten out of control. But I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just waited. And in the end, she picked up the pen and signed everything. No custody. No visitation. No rights. Just a signature that finally, officially, removed her from the life she had nearly destroyed. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was relief. Not for me but for Josh. Because after everything he could finally grow up in peace, without lies hanging over his head, and without a mother who used him as a weapon. Now Josh and I live together in a quiet kind of peace that we had to fight like hell to earn, and every day I look at him, I'm reminded of just how much we survived to get here. He's not just my son, He is my greatest victory, the living proof that love is stronger than betrayal, that truth always finds a way to rise no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. He is my pride in every sense of the word, not because of his grades or the way he's growing into a young man, but because even when everything was stacked against us, he chose to stay, to speak up, to fight for the bond we built together. We went through hell. We were lied to, betrayed, used as pawns in someone else's twisted game. But we stayed together. We held each other through every courtroom, every sleepless night, every moment when it felt like the ground was falling out from under us. And now, when we sit across from each other at the same kitchen table where everything once fell apart, we don't talk about Rachel or Eric or tests or signatures. We talk about dinner, about movies, about the future. No one will ever separate us again. Not through lies, not through blood, not through anything that tries to tell us we are less than what we are. Because at the end of it all, he is mine. And I am his. Always.